welcome to Global View. Today we are completely thrilled to have an exceptional guest, accomplished and brilliant journalist, but also an artist, I learned recently. A global figure who happens to have studied in Florence in Italy as well, and is a powerful voice in America, an established voice as a journalist both in the financial field, but also in political commentary. Welcome to TRISH REGAN, if I can add, a real-life bombshell.
Oh, gosh. Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Simona. Thank you so much for the introduction and good to see you, George.
Great to have you with us, Trish.
So I want to jump on the first question, if you allow me to. Actually, you have an incredible career spanning from leading media like CBS, Bloomberg, and also Fox Business. We have witnessed in the last years to shift into a journalistic narrative that really challenged what is journalistic integrity. How do you think this affected the power that mainstream media has in shaping public opinion? Do they still hold their power, or it's the year to run your own show?
No, I don't think they have the power at all. I mean, they kept telling us over and over and over again that Trump was basically the second coming of some of the worst, if not the worst, people. I mean, whether you want to pick your fascists, right? One killed millions and millions and millions of people. And this is where they kept going, right? That was the narrative over and over and over again, which I found insulting, frankly, to history, to the victims of the Holocaust, which I found insulting to our allies and to us, anybody that had lost a loved one fighting in World War II. When the media is telling you that, the mainstream media, ad nauseum, and people still vote for Donald Trump and he wins the popular vote along with the Electoral College, I think that's a big wake-up call. You know what, mainstream media, it's not working anymore. You can keep feeding those lies and you can ratchet them up and you can get it really, really exciting and tell us all HELL is going to break loose if this guy gets in. And you know what? People were like, yeah, I don't think so. Like at some point, the public became numb to it. And I think it's because they're seeking alternative sources of information. They want the truth. They don't want to be spoon-fed a narrative that has been sort of sanitized, if you would, and crafted by the deep state. They're looking for something raw, something transparent, something authentic. They got that in new forms of media, and they got that in Donald Trump.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, Trish, and it's really fascinating because you and I actually met when you were at Fox, and you had interviewed me at a time when so much of this disinformation about Russia collusion, the various fake scandals that they were trying to levy Trump with, his advisors, and they really put the country, through the ringer. But it was people like you and just truth seekers that really kept people focused on keeping the truth in the forefront. So I really appreciate that. So it's really
it got me in a bit of trouble, but you know what? Those are things I'm willing to deal with. I don't know. I'm just kind of a purist, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I say what I think. And sometimes people love it, sometimes people hate it, whatever. I really just think that my duty is, so long as I'm going to be out here doing this chosen profession, is to report the truth as much as I know it to be, and make sure that everybody sees everything. And if it means calling out some people along the way that don't want to get called out, okay, you know what, that's, I'm a big girl, I can handle that. But I think that so many members of the mainstream media are just they're not allowed to. And let's be honest. I mean, I wasn't either. So there's this narrative that they're forced to deliver. They deliver it day in, day out. They don't deviate. If they deviate, they lose their job. I mean, it's pretty simple. So I think the bias was extraordinary, like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, it's bizarre. You were very much a part of this. And when you go back in time and you think about everything that happened, even going back to 2016, and I remember the day that Donald Trump, the morning he was tweeting about Carter Page, and he may not have said Carter's name at the time, but he was furious, if you recall, because they had basically wiretapped Trump Tower. And they did that all based on false information and disinformation, misinformation, whatever you want to call it. I mean, bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign, by way of her law firm, by way of a Fusion GPS filled with a bunch of former investigative journalists who then went out and hired Christopher Steele, who then went out and hired some people, including one that the US suspected of being a Russian spy. And that's what was the impetus to get that FISA warrant to begin with. So when you think about that, and you're just supposed to believe it, hook, line, and sinker, like, oh, that couldn't have been Hunter Biden's laptop. No, that was Russian misinformation, disinformation fed to you courtesy of Rudy Giuliani. And Steve Bannon. I mean, that was bonkers to me that they were not willing to ever think about the other side. They just took everything that the 51X spooks that swore, this was definitely not Hunter's laptop to be true. They took that all, and ran with it. And I think that America has just sort of said, okay, enough. And I think it's sort of devastating because if you can't trust your institutions, then we don't have a very good situation. I mean, one of the faults that I think Russia has, frankly, is that no one believes what's coming out of the Kremlin. Well, we got to that point where no one could believe what was coming out of the Biden White House. No one could believe what was coming out of the establishment media. And I don't know is that genie's ever going to go back in the bottle. I mean, times have changed, and thank goodness they have, right? It's a refreshing thing. I'm not sitting here with a script that was pre-approved. I can only say this or that, and I can only ask you this question or that question. We just have a lot more freedom now.
Well, the lawfare has been brutal, but we have seen a collusion between government phony investigation that have been motivated by political ends, and media who have been censoring stories like the Hunter laptop, intelligence agencies, 51 member of intelligence agencies that finally have been fired for purposely manipulating this investigation in a real crime of the Biden's family. We have seen many countries involved into our politics, but all roads don't lead to Russia. It seems to lead to Ukraine. And we have seen a huge amount of American taxpayers' money allocated into a country that has been misappropriating all the resources that were destined technically to financial and humanitarian aids. How do you see all this machine evolving under second Trump administration? Do you think we will have the force to take down the deep state, and how media will ultimately align with the new political shift coming?
Ukraine, to me, was sort of a tragedy because that was a failure of diplomacy. I blame that one on Antony Blinken. I blame it on Biden. I blame it on the people not actually working hard enough to find a solution that didn't result in people dying. Like, it should never come to people dying. I'm sorry. There's a whole lot of things you can do before you get to that. It's one of the reasons why I like how Donald Trump is using tariffs, because he's trying to basically get people to do what he wants, but you don't want to escalate it in a way that you're actually risking lives. And I think there's a lot of financial tools, and I say that as somebody who's covered the markets and started off actually in finance early in my career. So I think there's a ton of financial tools. I think Scott Bessent, as Treasury Secretary, is a very sophisticated, extremely smart financier, and he understands the quote unquote arsenal that he has. And you should be willing to use these things. I mean, tariffs, very different, by the way, than sanctions, because sanctions are a whole other ballgame. Yes. And at that point, it's sort of game over once you sanction someone. But you have a lot of room when you're using these tariffs. And we saw right away, right? Trump said, oh, Colombia, you don't want to take back your people that are here illegally? Well, that'll be a 25% tariff on you. And then within 3 hours, Colombia was like, oh, we'll take them. And by the way, we'll send a plane too. And then you saw even just the quick time span by which you had Canada and Mexico immediately say, okay, we're willing to play ball. Justin Trudeau said, I got 1.3 billion I'm going to put to work on the border there, which, by the way, needed to happen. I remember looking into that story. I mean, we're going back over a decade ago when I was noticing that there was a lot of reporting or just sort of bits and pieces out there, some statistics I had gathered on the amount of drug flow coming in through China over the Chinese border into the US. I mean, this is something that should have been done. It could have been done, frankly, by Biden. So when I say, use the financial tools you have, I mean, I hate to see anything escalate to the point where people are losing lives. And so I look at Ukraine and Russia and just think that's devastating. Like, they should have had smarter, better people. With all this money we're spending on CIA ops, right? Like, what the heck is going on that could deteriorate to that point? And that's where we are today. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for it, obviously, and there's a history there, et cetera. A lot of things going on. And if you look at sort of the original ambassador to the USSR actually, he was advocating long ago. He's now since dead, but even back, during the Clinton administration, he was like, be very, very careful. Like, the more you expand NATO, the more you're going to run certain risks.
Of course.
And he was warning them, and this is canon, and nobody really took that advice, obviously, and they kept expanding. So I don't want to get into all that, but the reality is, at some point, the 11th hour, when you're on the verge of war, you got to have people that are willing to fix it and put all ego aside. And I don't think we had that with this last team. No. I'm really hopeful that Trump can come to some kind of solution that makes sense for everyone there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trish, look, this is a really unorthodox economic policy that the Trump administration has really implemented. Historically, we've seen sanctions or tariffs levied against so-called adversaries. Now, President Trump is actually levying tariffs on so-called allies, including Mexico, Canada, the European Union. He's looking at tariffs towards Japan, potentially South Korea, massive economies in Asia. So how do you view tariffs rebalancing the global economy? And secondly, in my opinion, I think the new Cold War is going to be between BRICS and the rest. We see the rise of this new BRIC system that's emerging and not so many people are talking about. Of course, President Trump seems very even keyed on addressing it. But how do you see these issues, meaning tariffs, potentially sanctions, and the rise of BRICS affecting the next 4 years of the global economy?
Okay, so on tariffs, he's got this, right? Yeah. Like he understands, as I was saying, the power of the financial tools at his disposal. And he's going to do everything he can to make sure that we have a more level playing field. I mean, for whatever reason, you guys, like the last however many years, I mean, this is sort of what they teach you in economics, the law of comparative advantage, and it makes sense for us to import all this stuff. And, you can go back to the Marshall Plan. I think some of the reasons why we have tariffs on our goods going overseas to Europe, for example, but no tariffs on their goods coming in is actually rooted in us trying to help them rebuild. Well, they've rebuilt and we're kind of out of money. So the game has changed a little bit. And I think Donald Trump, by the way, he's said this for years and years. I went back and saw something from like 25 years ago, I think on Larry King or Oprah. He was talking about the exact same thing. He's like, they're eating our lunch. Well, they are, because they have a whole different sort of system. And I think about, all the small towns across America. My husband's small town that he grew up in outside of Buffalo, they used to have a radiator plant where they made radiators for American cars. Mm-hmm. And before you knew it, the radiator plant, after NAFTA, Clinton, by the way, had relocated to Mexico. And this is all in the name of, it's great, it's great. Who's it great for? It's great for shareholders. And believe me, you're talking to a red-blooded American capitalist here. But at some point, you got to say, okay, we need to think about not just what's great for shareholders, but what is great for America. And we need people to be employed. And by the time you reroute production to Mexico and then you send everything back up, there's cost embedded in that. And so for whatever reason, it feels like a lot of people that were in power were more about how do we expand all these companies overseas. So maybe we get some market share, we get cheaper labor, but nobody was thinking about the long-term plan for the United States of America. There's a national security aspect to this, obviously, stuff that's important you don't want made overseas. And there's also just a national security standpoint from the sense that you want a population that's strong, healthy, and thriving. That is the key to the American dream, right? You want that middle-class success. And unfortunately, it's been annihilated, and it's all happened under both sides. Yeah. Both sides have been guilty on this. So I think he can change that. I mean, it's a long-winded way of saying, look, I think he wants to change that. He's coming in. He's in guns blazing. He's off to the races, right? There's nothing stopping him right now. And he's like, I've been waiting 4 years. I'm in there. I'm doing it. And the pace of which all this is happening is pretty extraordinary. So I would anticipate a lot of change. I mean, inflation is going to be tough for him. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be, unrealistic about that. I think it's hard because I think the Fed printed so much money for so long. So bringing inflation down, it will be very critical that he gets more energy out there. How do you get more energy into the markets? Well, you got to drill here, but that's not going to happen tomorrow, right? So even if you make all the plans to drill here, it still doesn't necessarily affect oil prices today. So I think inflation is still going to be tough from a global trade standpoint. Look, we need to actually focus on ourselves a little bit more. And as we move into this new economy, Web 3.0, the metaverse, whatever you want to call it, with ChatGPT and AI, I use that, ChatGPT, but you basically know what I mean. AI effectively sort of taking over the world. You're going to need to be at the forefront of that. And it's another reason I'm just thrilled. You have so many brilliant tech people, from Elon to Peter Thiel to David Sachs, who's going to be the crypto czar, is the crypto czar. I mean, these are smart people that get what's at stake. And there's so much, because the world is shifting. And if we don't actually keep up, believe me, the BRICS will. Like, the BRICS are already trying to find another solution that gets them off of the US dollar, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, just to close that point, I think you could argue that faulty sanctions on Russia and other countries, including on the African continent, Latin America, really ushered in this new BRICS system, because these countries felt if they can sanction us and freeze our assets, then maybe we should look to replace SWIFT. And that's something that certainly I think is a problem. And I think President Trump does have the right team to address. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's not be naive about that. And let's, look, I mean, if you've got a bank, if I go and put my money in JP Morgan and next week JP Morgan's like, you know what, we don't like that podcast that you did last week, so we're going to freeze your account. I'm going to probably try and find another place other than, not to pick on JP Morgan, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, the US is sort of the JP Morgan of the world. And when that bank becomes closed because we don't like what you're doing right now, you can understand it gets a little bit tense, right? Like, it can't just be our way or the highway when it comes to people's assets. Not if you want to be the reserve currency of the world and you want people to keep buying your US Treasury bonds. It's just not going to happen. And that's one of the reasons. And look, I'm a big fan of Bitcoin and crypto technology in general, but I think it's one of the reasons why some of these emerging market countries have said, wait a second, we got to look around and see what else is out there, whether it be gold, which is one option, or whether it be cryptos, because we can't rely on the US. That's not a great position if we want to still be king dollar.
When we look at, we go back to European Union, and we look at the coverage of Trump victory, one of the biggest concerns of so-called representativity of the European Union, if something like that even exists as an interlocutor to the United States, that we can argue about. Their concern is tariffs. They are preoccupied with Trump implementing this promise. He has been consistent with everything he promised, and now they are concerned about impact on their market of exporting goods to these new prices. Well, I think it's a little bit disingenuous, because I believe the politics of putting your country first should start from actually giving priority of your companies and manufacture. And besides that, using tariff as a leverage, as you said, leading by strength and using this as a financial tool to also control other diplomatic balances. But what do you think? What would you say to this European Union journalists that keep blaming on Trump for these so-called tariffs?
Look, I think the European Union needs to focus on being the best European Union it can be, which means you want to be the most competitive. You want to have the best tax rates. I look at, I got a lot of family in Ireland. Wow. Like, there was a time until Donald Trump came into office and he put an end to this by just saying, hey, why don't you come back home? It was like a shotgun marriage. Every company you knew wanted to do a deal with another company in Ireland because it was only 12% corporate tax. So it was like, boom, boom, boom. All these companies were big American companies buying some little Irish company just so they could incorporate there. Well, guess what? All the money then stayed there because it was being taxed at 12%. And Trump said, hey, you know what? We're going to forget about that. You bring it back, you get a tax holiday. I mean, again, brilliant move. It's actually very intuitive, and it should have actually occurred to other people, but for whatever reason, like with other people, things aren't happening. So as far as Europe goes, listen, create an economy that's competitive. Compete with us. We welcome the competition. We really do. But you need to start by getting off of the wokeism yourself, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Like, I think Europe has sort of, like, that's what we don't want to be. Like, sometimes I joke, like,
the counter model.
If we're not careful, China's going to turn into the next US, and we're going to be the next France.
Yeah, exactly.
which, you know, they've got great food and all that. Actually, we can borrow, you know, RFK Jr. is onto something like you know, no additives in food. But, you know, even Italy, which is where I know you're from. I mean, I was just there and I was amazed and impressed by the people and the education level of the people and their fluency in English and
your fluency in Italian. If I can interrupt, we had a short exchange in Italian. You speak perfectly. I'm really impressed. Brava, no, molto brava.
Grazie. But I was there, and and by the way, lots of optimism for Trump among the people in Italy.
Oh, they love it.
They love him.
We don't have the social envy that many people have in France, for example. You know, we thrive for greatness.
But you also have Meloni, and they know that Meloni, you know, is clued in, Giorgia Meloni. But look, they were excited for us. They were excited for America. They were excited for the world because they thought, you know, there's a chance at some really good things happening. And I'm with them because I look at an economy like Italy and I'm like, gosh, you know, if it weren't for this, this, and this, they would just be killing it. Like tremendous people, such work ethic. There's just so many good things to say about Italy. And
Thank you.
Look, I'm partial.
And I can't wait to stream this interview for the Italian audience. It will be absolutely.
I really do. I love the country. I vacation there a lot, and I was even married there. But I would say that, listen, if you can get some of the bureaucratic nonsense out of the way, take a page from Trump, right?
Yeah, totally.
Take a page from Doge. Get that out of the way, lower taxes, unleash these animal spirits, if you would, because the population is tremendous. They want to work. And, you know, if you just kind of clear the way, human beings are pretty universal in that sense. And that I think that creativity, that ingenuity, that work ethic will all get unleashed.
Talking about creativity, you're an opera singer as well. I don't think many people knows that.
No, occasionally I came out with a 4th of July album a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I'm working on Christmas. I did. I studied l'opera lirica for many years, and that was actually my first sort of love. So the first time I was ever on television, I remember thinking, wait a second, like, you just want me to talk? It's in English? I can handle that. Beats singing a German aria.
So it's like a good plan for vacations over there.
Trish, we had Steve Bannon on last week, and obviously he was the White House chief strategist in the first Trump administration, and he raised a really interesting point about AI that you just mentioned, except he wasn't really optimistic about the future of AI. Obviously, it's a incredible new technology. It's going to reshape the world. It's going to reshape the global economy, but it's going to affect workers that we, especially if you are a MAGA populist America First president, like President Trump is, do you see an inconsistency with this push and investment drive in AI from the Trump administration vis-a-vis promoting the working class? Or do you think they could cooperate?
Look, I think it's one of those things that you're either on board or not. I do worry about it. I mean, hey, there'll come a day when they won't even need all of us here, right? They'll just plug into a program. What would Trish say? What would Simona say? What would George say? And there you go.
Fix the accent here.
Right. So listen, none of us are exempt from that. I mean, I do think that AI, gosh, could replace us all. What are we going to be doing? We're going to be like sitting home. I don't know what we're going to be doing, you know? I could say you'd be sitting home eating Cheetos, you know, with everything else being done for you, except you probably won't want the Cheetos because you'll have the various drugs to keep your weight under control or something. I don't know. I'm sort of kidding around, but I think it is actually a pretty bleak future for all workers. And this AI thing is major. Yet what happens if we're not participating in that economy? I say that on an individual level as an investor, right? Because I also run a financial research company that I co-founded with longtime investor on Wall Street, Rob Horton, who's run billions of dollars. And it's terrific what we're doing, but we're trying to make sure that people understand that you don't want to be left out of that as well, because if AI is really what controls everything, then you need to be invested in that in some way, shape, or form so that you're not stuck on the low end of that equation. And I think it's the same thing from the perspective of the Trump administration. Donald Trump knows that this has the potential to really take over the world. So do you want China doing that? I don't think so. So while it's frightening and scary, I think you also want to be around it and at the forefront of it, because it's going to happen whether you like it or not. We can't prevent it from happening. Somebody else will do it.
He's so much ahead of time and preserving America greatness. I think I always say leader of the free world. I wish every leader, including our Giorgia Meloni, which actually is a great, strong leader in Italy, still looks up to Trump. She ran to Mar-a-Lago before even inauguration to visit him. So I think it's really powerful shift globally. America leads the world, and what do you think European Union member states are going to position themselves now when it comes to implement sanctions to Russia, or following the Biden lead that have been following until 2 months ago?
Oh, how do I think they fare, or how should they position themselves?
Yes, how they can shift now so dramatically, because they're used to follow.
Look, I think Italy's leading the way.
Yeah,
again,
I think it's gonna.
Not to be too partial.
I know, actually, was my point. I didn't want to say that myself, but such a smart woman. I said, like,
maybe this is what I picked up on. When I was in Italy, it's entirely possible this is the energy I picked up on, because the enthusiasm was off the charts. And this is from, everybody who had big deal jobs to, waiters at cafes. This is something that I just noticed amongst everyone in the population. And I thought that was really compelling. I had been there over the summer, and I had heard a lot about kind of just what a dead end it was. Unfortunately, they were really, there was some pessimism. And when I went back after Trump won, in the same town,
happy,
there was a whole different vibe. And optimism breeds more optimism. And I was so thrilled to see that. And I think Italy knows now that it really has a seat at the table, and that it can make a big difference in the future of Europe. I don't mean to pick on the French, but
I did first.
But France has a lot of baggage. Okay, there's just a lot of baggage, and I think Italy is an optimistic place with tremendous people, and people are just set on moving forward in a confident, optimistic, excited way, and that's what everything. So you're like on the train or you're not on the train, right? And I think people in Italy are on the train, and they want to enjoy this next sort of phase, whatever it may be. So I see Italy as actually having the potential to play a major role in shaping the world and shaping Europe as we move forward.
Thank you so much. It's very important to preserve your identity, your culture, and your religious roots, which in our case are Judeo-Christian. So the fact that France allowed in so many impostors in the terms of illegals, because of course there is a legal process of immigration and illegal one. And even in the European Union, illegal immigration is a huge issue. The fact that they are tolerated in the name of human rights and blah, 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 is just something that undermines our safety overall. And also the fact that we allow other cultures to take over our own culture is not xenophobia. I'm the most tolerant, inclusive person in this world. I'm just talking about a healthy sense of identity, which is sacred. And I think Italians still embrace and will look up to the United States for the same reason.
For sure. No, and look, we have that in the States too, right? I grew up in New England. Sometimes I wish I grew up in the South, but I grew up in New England, and New Hampshire, live free or die, New Hampshire. That's our motto. It's on the state license plate. It's like the first thing I ever learned to read as a kid. So go New Hampshire. It's changed a bit in recent years, but it really has some libertarian roots that are about self-governance. And that's something that's a cultural identity, I think, for me. And if you're somebody who, as you grew up in Italy, that's a cultural identity. You can't just ignore that. Mm-hmm. I think that you have to respect that for everyone. When you look at something like Germany, my heart breaks for Germany, because
yes,
they've got situations there where they now have to have men and women swimming in pools at different hours because of the influx of people that have come from Syria that don't respect seeing a woman in a swimsuit in a bathing facility. Like, that's a problem, right? Now you're changing your life to accommodate them, as opposed to them assimilating into the culture. Sweden, we see a similar story. I have very good friends from Sweden who now tell me they're being told not to wear Swedish flags on their shirts when they go out. And to me, like, that is not where any of us want to go at all. So something has to give.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and look, and I think President Trump has really found some really important allies this time around, like he did the first term. He was very close with Abe in Japan, obviously, before he was unfortunately assassinated. He had other leaders that he had cozied up to. I think he's cozying up to people like Meloni, Orban in Europe, and then you have Milei in Argentina, and
Oh
he's
yeah,
building.
Milei.
Yeah, and
we didn't even talk about Milei. I mean, that's amazing what he's done down there.
I mean, and actually, so what I wanted to ask you is if you can provide some insight into this economic revival that's happening in Argentina and how Trump choosing these working partners, meaning these working countries, will affect the global economy. Because right now it seems that you're either with the Trump agenda or you're not. Some countries have subscribed to it. Others are pushing back, and there's really probably going to be this battle over who ends up winning. So, what's your opinion on how this divided, fractured world is going to look after 4 years of Trump?
I think that it's going to look really different. I mean, Trudeau, he's out.
Exactly.
I'm still waiting though. But he's out. Claudia Sheinbaum, listen, the way the numbers work on this one, we're not losing anything by putting a 25% tariff on Mexico and having them reciprocate. If that happens, like, give it a couple of weeks, Mexico's in a recession. Mm-hmm. What we ship to Mexico is 1% of our GDP. So it's irrelevant. It's somewhere around 18 to 20% of their GDP. So it matters for them. So basically, she's out of office if Trump sticks to the 25% tariff or reinstates it. As for Milei, I mean, Milei is a great example of somebody who went in there and just said, we're cleaning house. We're going to change everything. We're going to get rid of the bureaucracy. We're going to get rid of all these silly, jobs where nobody comes to work. Sounds familiar, does it not? And the people are thrilled. I have close friends from Argentina, including people that were extraordinarily skeptical of him coming in there. Mm-hmm. And they're like, wow. I mean, for once, like, we're not dealing with crazy inflation. They don't have to change the restaurant prices every single day. It was out of control, believe me, in Argentina. So they needed that financial stability that he could offer, but it meant taking some pain, and they're still taking a little bit of pain, but it's better prosperity. They're seeing much, much more success. So that's a great success story. I think Italy's going to be another success story. I mean, this is crazy to say, and I have to be careful because people are like, Venezuela, but I mean, Nicolas Maduro just let 6 American hostages go and said he's willing to take all 300,000 of the Venezuelan people who are here illegally back. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if there might be, just saying, some oil maybe in the works at some point, because they're sitting on the Orinoco oil field, which actually would rival Saudi Arabia. You basically just stick a straw in the ground and you're going to have oil. But American oil companies all got kicked out under Chavez. So I look, it's dicey, and it's still Maduro, and it's a Chavista, regime, and I would say be cautious with it. But look at Venezuela. I mean, there's a lot of countries around the world that historically we wouldn't see as possibly ever wanting to have anything to do with. But again, Venezuela is a country that has rich resources that we might want and need at some point.
That's very interesting analysis, and thanks for sharing it with us. I really think we are going toward the age of common sense, which has been taken away from us. We should apologize for being white, apologize for our religion, or apologize just for having our political opinion. We have seen a lot of censorship even in social media. How do you think this shaped information?
How did censorship shape information? Mm-hmm. It made us crave even more and go to new places to get it, right? Yeah. I mean, in some ways, the left created this backlash by constantly playing this game of whack-a-mole and saying, nope, truth can't come out. I mean, look, coronavirus is a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had heard in February of 2020 that this was out of the Wuhan lab. So this was before the shutdown all over the country. Like that was in February of 2020. I had also heard that it wasn't deliberate, that it was a mistake. But I'm hearing that in February 2020 from pretty good sources. And then fast forward, I believe it was in May of 2020 in a press conference where a Fox reporter actually asked Donald Trump, could this have come from Wuhan, China? And he said, yeah, I've seen some intelligence to that fact. And everyone went bonkers. Like Anthony Fauci was everywhere over the airwaves. And I think, the Science Journal came out with something just absolutely, they attacked him relentlessly because he said that. But he was being truthful. Like that information was out there. And then sure enough, what do you know? I mean, it took the CIA forever, but every other three-letter agency came out and said, yep, it came from Wuhan, China. And now with Radcliffe in, they finally decided, yeah, it came from Wuhan, China. But why did they feel that they had to withhold that information from us for so long? And then to attack the president of the United States because he actually told the truth? That he had seen intelligence that suggested that could be one of the options. It's this game of whack-a-mole. They go and they try and shut everything down, and people are like, no, I want the truth, and I'm going to find it. And I'm going to go listen to different kinds of people and different kinds of channels and podcasts and YouTube and Rumble and all these other places where I can actually get something that's not, I'd like to call it paint by number news. Right? Like they have like this little narrative that they want to give, and then they write it into the teleprompter and they get the sound bites for their supporting evidence, and they throw in a little B-roll and they slap it together, boom. And people are like, no, you don't need to dumb it down like that for me. I actually want the truth.
Mm-hmm. And look, some of the most bombshell stories came during the Vietnam War by intrepid journalists, investigatory journalists who wanted the truth. It seems now that the media, let's call it the mainstream media, reporters are interested in so-called official narratives, which come directly from, most of the time, the intelligence agencies, the establishment. So we were really spoon-fed a half story, sometimes a non-story, for the last 10 years or so. So it's I completely agree with you, and it's really fascinating to see how the mainstream media's credibility has just completely gone into the toilet, whether it's a self-inflicted wound, whether it was willfully, whether they knew this was going to happen, whether they predicted the rise of social media and alternative media forums. But it's an incredible pleasure and real privilege to have something
it is power to the people.
To just to talk directly to our audience, which people are just so hungry for this type of information. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
It's true. I mean, I've seen it, George, just in my own podcast that I do. I started this maybe about a year and a half ago, and we just said, okay, we're going to do this every day, Monday through Friday, every day. Like sometimes the microphone didn't even work. The viewers were like, hey, but it was real. It was authentic. It's still very real and authentic. But, I started and we had like 0 subs, and here I am at 560 some odd thousand subs. It's all organic. Like there's no marketing. There's nothing. It's literally just me going on I have a producer, and, we go through stories together and that kind of thing. But in the beginning, I didn't even have that. So what I'm saying is this is power to the people. In other words, they are seeking out truth, and they respect the forms and the people from, that are delivering it. And they'll actually even be forgiving of things like, the microphone here and there. Very forgiving, because they know that at least it's coming from a good place without any bias, and certainly no institutional bias.
What would be your suggestions, your advice to aspiring journalists today?
Start a YouTube channel, a Twitter account, and start talking to everyone and get information. You don't need to go to journalism school. You certainly don't need to go to a network. Those days are over. Yeah. I mean, they really are.
Awesome. I'm so happy to hear it from you, because it's so refreshing, and I love your podcast, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. But I would just say, like, in the old days, I used to say to people, well, I'm going to go to journalism school. I'm like, don't go to journalism school. Go study something real. And then come to journalism. In my case, I was in finance. So I had, and I still always have that. It's sort of like this foundation, this base, as opposed to being a journalist where, what are you to
learn? Does even mean
how to cut tape?
Exactly.
how to take the deep state narrative?
I love it. Yeah. I'm actually a lawyer. So I'm exactly.
See, that's a perfect example, because you're coming with a whole other sort of vast background in something that's really of substance. I mean, I really, if you're a lawyer, obviously you can write, right? Like, so maybe that's, and nowadays we're not even writing anymore, right? Like, unless you do a documentary, this is all talk and information. And I think just being able to find the story is the most critical thing, but that's not something that you learn in journalism school. So study something else, anything else, but be sort of a more informed person of the world when you come to report, because, you know, otherwise you're just too susceptible, dare I say, to that narrative that's being spun and fed to the mainstream media.
Thank you so much.
Trish, where can people find you? What's the name of your podcast for our audience to follow you and to check it out?
It's
And where
really
can they follow you
simple.
on X?
It's really simple. It's the Trish Regan Show on YouTube. I'm there live every day. You can also find us on Rumble, on Twitter. But YouTube has been a big win, and Facebook as well. Hit and miss on Facebook.
What about
full disclosure? That's another story for another day.
Exactly.
I'm glad to see that Mark's coming around, however.
Finally.
So you can find me there also at 76research.com, which is our financial research company that I am co-founder of. So I'd love to see everyone there. And I congratulate both of you guys on everything that you're doing. And listen, like, you build it and they will come. I mean that.
And when we have guests like you, it helps. It has been such an honor to have you on, really, with great admiration for everything you've done and everything you do. Thank you so much.
Molto grazie. Thank you.
Prego, grazie mille, anche
Thanks
dall'Italia.
Thanks so much, Trish.